Hello, everyone. Welcome to How Training Shaped My Career. On behalf of BroadwayCon, I'd like to issue a trigger warning should we discuss any of the following topics: depictions of racism, homophobia, and abuse in the workplace or educational system. Everyone on the panel introduce themselves to our viewers. Please, anyone, feel free to start.
I'm Anthony Rapp. I'm co-founder of BroadwayCon. Melissa and Ellie and I have been friends for about 25 years or so, and she sort of dreamed it up one night while we were watching the Tonys, the notion that this might be something that we could do. And then thank you to all of the people in the theater community who've made it such a wonderful reality for the past several years. I'm currently doing this from Toronto, Ontario, where I'm in the middle of shooting season 4 of Star Trek Discovery. And I hope that in my off season, I get to do some more theater when theater opens again. So that's me.
And my name is Tonya Pinkins, and I've been doing theater or some form of art for almost 50 years. I just made my first feature film, which is called Red Pill, which has been playing festivals all over. It's a socio-political horror film. And I also just finished shooting down in Mississippi for 3 months, a new ABC anthology series called Women of the Movement, and it is the story of Mamie Till and the murder of Emmett Till, and I play his grandmother.
And I'm Andrew Goren. I have always been a theater fan and a theater kid. I did a lot of performing growing up from a young age, but then a couple years ago, I started a company called Harmony Helper, and I'm the founder and CEO of that.
Amazing. See, this is why I'm so glad that you guys introduced yourselves, because the whole time I would be like listing all of your wonderful accolades and being like, so I'm a really big fan of this and I love this, and I actually love Harmony Helper as well, because my podcast, Tell Me on a Sunday, is a sponsor, is with Harmony Helper. So I'm a big fan of everybody. So this is great. I'll start with you, Andrew. What type of training have you had? I saw you attended Drexel University. Could you tell us about any and all training that you've had in your respective field? That can be college, conservatory, private coachings, or all of the above.
Yeah, so it sort of all started out in an elementary school production that I did. And my teacher said, you need to look at the Walnut Street Theater's education program. And I did Camp Walnut there. And I, from a young age, I started to get involved in a lot of the local Philadelphia theater scene education programs. So Camp Walnut, Teen Arden at the Arden Theater is a fantastic, at least when I was there, was an entirely free program for teenagers in Philadelphia, New Jersey. Absolutely fantastic. And then one of the last sort of programs that I did was the Paper Mill Playhouse at Summer Conservatory. I did that in 2015, 2016. And then we actually beta tested Harmony Helper there in 2017. From a private standpoint, a mentor and close teacher, close friend is Rob McClure. I met him through the Arden Theater's Teen Arden program, actually, and then he became a mentor to me and then ended up becoming our artistic advisor at Harmony Helper. I also have some formal vocal training as well, with my voice coach, Robert Edwin, who was on a panel that I hosted last year at BroadwayCon. And he also works on Harmony Helper with us as well. And then I got to do some training at Drexel as well, but then I went on a leave of absence to work on Harmony Helper full time.
Yeah, I feel like leaving at the very beginning is going to be a continued theme with our panelists. But yeah, so thank you so much for that, Andrew. Was the education that you had there at all helpful with the development of Harmony Helper, or was that something that you just started researching on your own?
In general, with everything, or Drexel specifically?
Literally any of your training. It can include Drexel if that was like the last thing that you were doing right beforehand, or any of the other stuff.
All of my training has played a huge part in Harmony Helper and business and entrepreneurship in general. From the Harmony Helper standpoint, literally understanding the problems that singers and our users have that a lot of that comes from training, and also seeing how other people train. In fact, I still have my Thursday Zoom voice lessons at 1 p.m. with Robert Edwin, because not only does it fuel the artistic side of me, it also fuels the business side of me. From the other side of things as well, I feel, and I could go on forever about this, I feel that the skills that you learn as an artist, or even behind the scenes in the performing arts, are extremely valuable and reach way beyond actual performing. I feel like artists make very valuable assets to companies and to entrepreneurship in general.
Yeah, I literally couldn't agree with you more. So, Miss Tonya Pinkins, could you tell us about any and all of your training that you've had as well?
Another thing, yeah. I think I'm always training. I think I'll be learning until they put me in the mushroom tree building thing. I think my first training was when I was about 2 or 3. My mother started me with just etiquette and learning how to enunciate and articulate. My first theater training, I was about 8 or 9. It was a little theater company downtown Chicago. And then I had some voice lessons after that. And then in elementary school, I had a teacher who did very elaborate theater programs. So I got to play Golda and Huddle in Fiddler on the Roof. I got to play Anna in The King and I got to play Annie in The Miracle Worker in elementary school. And then I went to Whitney Young High School, where I got to do Eileen. So this is training. You know, these are schools where you're working on learning, you're learning the skills and you're doing the show. I started studying professionally when I was 15 at the St. Nicholas Theater Company. They were developing their Meisner technique. So William H. Macy was my first teacher, and Stephen Schachter. And then in the summer, I was at the Goodman Young People's training program, and through that I ended up auditioning and doing my first play that went to the Kennedy Center while I was in high school. And so I did St. Nicholas all through high school. I then went to Carnegie Mellon and did their musical theater program for a year. And then I booked Merrily We Roll Along over my freshman year at Carnegie, came out of there, studied with Herbert Berghoff, studied with Stella Adler, studied with William Warren Robertson, did the 2-year program with Bill Esper, studied with Larry Moss in LA, have studied with Tim Phillips, Amy Jo Berman, Stuart K. Robertson. Those don't even include my vocal teachers, you know, in the midst of all of that. And yeah, and I feel like I'm always learning when I'm being directed, like being in the room with really smart people and actors. I learn from all of them. So I'm always learning. You know, always looking to learn more. I feel like my training, you know, people used to tell me I was talented, and that was scary because I'm like, what's that? Like, I don't know how to rely on that. Like, that's like some ineffable thing. And training gave me some skills and tools that I could rely on in case that talent thing didn't show up one day.
I think for you, it will always show up. I also love good shout outs to Chicago, because I think some of the best theater comes out of Chicago for sure. Mr. Anthony Rapp, you are similar to Ms. Tonya, where you briefly attended a very popular institution. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And then, of course, all of the training before and after that you participated in.
Well, I went to Nyu Film School just for 1 semester, because I've been acting since I was 6 years old, very similar to Tonya. Started out doing community theater and in and around Chicago mostly, where I grew up outside Chicago. And so I didn't really have a formal acting class really until I went to Interlochen. It was then called National Music Camp. Now it's called, I believe, Fine Arts Camp, but it's in Northern Michigan. At the time, it was an 8-week program. I think that they've shortened it a little bit, but like it was a program. We barely had time to like take a hike. I mean, we were in class from morning until night, and rehearsals. I did 4 shows in 8 weeks one summer. But that's where I had my first real, what I would call an acting technique class. Although I also, like Tonya, had incredible training on the job, working with different directors and actors. That the spring before my second summer at Interlochen was when I worked with Norman Renee and Judith Ivey and Ed Harris in the play Precious Sons. And that was that spring was such a transformative experience, not only being in that play with those incredible artists, but also seeing so many amazing plays and musicals that spring. The House of Leaves with John Mahoney and Susie Kurtz, Search for Signs of Intelligent Life in the Universe with Lily Tomlin. These were some of the shows that really stood out in my memory. And I think that training is also so much about seeing other people's work and not trying to emulate, but trying to, you know, being inspired and absorbing what you see and having it something to aspire to, the quality of it. If you see a performance, and it's not just that you're like, oh, I loved her in that, or I loved him in that, but what was it about? What made it so special? And seeing that maybe you can find that kind of effort or ability in yourself. I consider that very big part of training also. Then when I moved to New York to go to NYU, even though I dropped out of NYU, I also shortly thereafter found an acting teacher. And I had audited an acting class in LA like a year before when I was there, and I've been kind of like really bummed out by it because I found the teacher was just sort of like talking about himself, and the students were barely getting any work done. I was like, what is happening here? So I kind of like I was cynical about private acting teachers, but a friend of mine said, no, come check this teacher out. And so I audited, and from the moment she started talking, I was like, oh yeah, she's working for me. Her name is Sandy Shurin. And one of the things that she was talking about that resonated so profoundly for me was accessing the power that you have as an artist. Maybe it's as simple as turning on a light switch or turning on a faucet. What if, she's like, what if that's true? That all it takes is sort of connecting to yourself and then accessing that. That was a really intriguing idea. That same week, I had an audition for 6 Degrees of Separation. As I was waiting in the waiting room, I kind of just did a little like, what if that's true? And I kind of just found that little part of myself, went in and got the job. So it just felt like, yeah, this kind of works for me. So I studied with her then for the next several years, and very specific exercise we did in class, I absolutely think prepared me for Rent, for instance, and on and on and on. And that was really the last time I had any sort of like formal training per se. But again, all the on-the-job training just continues to this day.
Yeah, that's leading us into the next part of this for, I guess, you and everyone else. You know, do you feel like the lessons that you've learned while working on stage or TV film sets has been of more value or equal to any of your professional training?
It's hard to say like which is more or less, but they're hand in hand. So I think one of the things about doing 8 shows a week that's like the on-the-job training that's you can only get doing that is the kind of discipline and rigor and knowledge of what it takes to be able to do that. You can sort of be told, oh, it's going to be challenging and you're going to have to take good care of your body and good care of your voice. But until you're in it, no matter what anybody tells you, you can't know. So the training of that, just like an athlete, I always think like Broadway, especially Broadway musical performers, it's the closest that we have to being an athlete, of having to maintain that quality. But if I didn't have some of the tools that I'd worked with Sandy, those very simple tools, I think that would have made doing 8 shows a week more challenging, you know, but just knowing that I could rely on that very simple stuff to just go, whoop, here it is. It's almost like press a button and I'm ready kind of thing. That wouldn't have made the 8 shows a week easier. So they feed each other in my experience.
Yeah, I would say they feed each other. Theater is something that you can train without a lot of money, and there's a muscularity that's required, that is needed in the theater to reach the back row, that sort of when you try to transfer to TV and film, you actually have to unlearn that, and that is a skill that's difficult to teach in a class. You kind of just have to get that practice in front of the lens and the camera. But theater, you can just get your friends together and try some things and see how people respond to them. So yeah, the work and the training feed each other. And also theater, you have rehearsal. Other things, you have no rehearsal and you don't know what they liked in your audition, and you're showing up and you don't even know what they want you to do, and there's no rehearsal.
Yeah, that's hard to overstate the difference in terms of that. In most film and television experience, you have a rehearsal, where you read through the scene with your fellow actors, some of whom, if you're a guest on that show, you're meeting them for the first time. And then within an hour, you're now filming that scene and it's going to be that way forever. You know, there are some times where you get a little lucky. Like if you do a feature film, sometimes they do have a rehearsal process, but not always. Yeah, so like I do think that having a theater background, knowing what rehearsal can mean and just trusting that you can dive in, at the same time letting go of the desire to have a rehearsal process where you get to really explore, that's a bit of a mind screwing kind of thing sometimes.
From my side, I also agree that I don't think that one is more valuable from the other. From my side, I think that a lot can be learned by jumping in and doing, seeing what worked, what didn't work, from performing, from auditioning. There's so much that can be learned from auditioning. That was something that I think Rob actually taught me of. Just go on auditions and learn and you know, think about if you didn't get the job or you didn't get the role, what can be learned from that moment. The other thing that I've always found when taking classes that has been extremely valuable to me, which sort of goes against the doing. Doing is important, but also watching how other people learn, watch other people get up and sing their song or do their scene, seeing what feedback they get and seeing how they learn, and then putting yourself in their position and seeing if you would have thought of that and how you would have done things differently. There's a lot to be learned from watching other people learn. So that's sort of the other side of things that have found very valuable.
If I could add something to the watching too, I think if you ever get the chance to be in an audition on the other side of the table, take it, because you will learn so much. And so many times people can kill in their auditions, be amazing and not get the part, and it has nothing to do with how amazing they were or not. There's so many other factors. Like if you have 3 amazing people, you can only cast 1 person. And there's just those qualities, those mix and match qualities or whatever it is that are part of that determination. So it can be incredibly educational and a kind of training to be able to sit on the other side and experience it from that side too.
Yeah, especially in New York, we see a lot of people volunteering to be readers, you know, and that's such a wonderful opportunity for people, because it's true, like you all said, you know, when you're sitting in a vacuum and you're just sitting with yourself and your own kind of like self-destructive sometimes, you know, mental talk, seeing other people being like, oh, cool, I'm not alone, you know, I'm seeing other people in this world and I'm doing it. So I love that from all of you. Thank you so much. Tonya and Anthony, both of you made very early jumps from student to professional. How quickly did you have to make that transition from student to pro?
I was 9 years old when I got my equity card, so that's pretty quickly. But you know, it didn't really feel that different from an experiential standpoint, except we were doing more shows. But other than that, the experience of being with my fellow actors was so much the same. You know, yeah, we were in a bigger theater, and I had to report, you know, 8 times a week or whatever it was. But other than that, the experience of being on stage, the experience of hanging out with my friends, that was as familiar as it had ever been. And I didn't do a film for another 6 years, so I was sort of steeped in that. And then going to film was a different kind of leap. All those technical things, like even walking around seeing what are those, what's all that machinery, all that stuff, and learning about what's a mark, learning what the, you know, size lens means, what Tonya was talking about, like being able to hone performance in for the camera. Although it doesn't necessarily mean they always have to be quiet in front of the camera or small. I mean, if you think of Robin Williams, some of his performances were very large. If it has to be right, it has to be true for whatever it is. But anyway, so that was a different kind of leap. And then, you know, doing a TV show is a different kind of leap because you're having to learn so much material in such a short amount of time over the period of months. So like calibrating your brain a little differently. But it's all like, those are degrees within the larger leap.
And I forgot to say that I also did the Northwestern Sharer program when I was in high school as well. So I had to do that summer acting program. I got my SAG and AFTRA cards probably when I was about 12. So I was doing commercials and industrials in Chicago and modeling in Chicago. And I got my equity card when I was 15 or 16. I think the challenge for me, quote, going pro at 16 was, you know, that I looked mature, but and I was in this cast with all these adults, and they just weren't very nice. And so that was it was emotionally really hard for me doing that play at 16. But then the other interesting thing is, like, I sort of had to grow up to be in this space with all these adults, so that when I came back, in my senior year to be a senior, like, I just didn't feel like a high schooler anymore. I had already been to the Kennedy Center and I had my own apartment, and so there was I'm too young for you all to talk to me like that. And then it was like, oh, I've already been grown, kind of thing. And then, when I went to Carnegie, it was their music theater program. You're dancing every day, you're singing every day, you're doing solfege and, taking music theory. And I remember everybody in my Carnegie class, they knew solfege. They knew how to recite, sing, and I did not. And my teacher said, you're going to fail. Essentially, she was saying, I'm not going to teach it. And I never failed anything in my life. And so I developed a really great ear that if I heard it before I had to go, if I didn't have to go first, I could memorize what it was. And that's how I ended up getting a B in solfege, because I wasn't going to fail and she wasn't going to teach me. So, I think a lot of times there's a lot of faking it till you make it kind of thing. I found that, booking a Broadway show over Christmas break, when I came back to finish my year at Carnegie, because the show wasn't going to happen to the next fall, there was just cruelty. There was just, like, I was treated with disdain and hate, and the school never even claimed me as a student. So, yeah, and then I went to Broadway and I got to be in Hal Prince and Steve Sondheim's biggest flop. And the gift of that was, these are the two people that I grew up all my life wanting to work with. Like, that was the dream. They were the most successful, and those were the shows and the music. And to watch the best of the best fail was the best lesson that I ever got in my life, because one, it taught me that no matter how good you are, you can fail, and it isn't the end. And so when I went out and became a professional thereafter, there was just very little that fazed me. It was like, oh, that happened. Well, when merrily roll along, like, this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. So I just was like, had a sort of tough thing about, like, there was just very little that could go wrong that was going to faze me, because we had gone through it all on Merrily.
Yeah. Yes, that documentary is excellent. Andrew, tell me about your transition from student to professional world.
Yeah, definitely an interesting one, especially, so there's sort of two sides of this. There's the theater side where, some brief professional stuff, but then also the business side. From the theater side, I booked my first professional show when I was 12 or 13 years old. I was doing A Christmas Carol at the Walnut Tree Theater. And I literally missed like 3 months of school. It was just out of nowhere, missing 3 months of whatever grade I was in, I think 6th or 7th grade. And it was insane. It was a blast. Similar experience to Anthony, of just like, it felt like another show, just so ever so slightly different, but it was just fun. It was, the show was geared towards schools and children, so that was pretty cool and a lot of fun. But then from the business side of things slowly transitioned to that side of the professional world. And I will say, from a school or work management standpoint, the performing side and my experience with Christmas Carol and some other shows sort of prepared me for that, because I was already used to understanding what it felt like to essentially work 2 jobs, full-time student, in middle school and high school essentially, and then perform or run a business. But then from there, especially from the business side of things, I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so it's sort of in my DNA, but I was able to take sort of the experience that I learned performing and training in the theater world and channel those into the entrepreneurial and professional world. A lot of performance, essentially, when giving a pitch, or improv, or faking it till you make it, and learning from experience, doing and learning and progressing. So it was a crazy jump, but at the same time, it was sort of just a smooth transition into, this is what life is like. It's really interesting to look back and reflect upon, because when it first started, I was sort of just doing it and living by the moment, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so being in your house is like an episode of Shark Tank. That's lovely. We love to see it. Excellent. This is kind of a question for everybody. I would love to hear about the mentors that you've had along the way. I know that sometimes those people can be different than the people that you trained with. Does anyone want to share an anecdote from any of these mentors? Good, bad, or ugly? Like truly, I want to hear it all. So this is kind of for everyone.
It started out really, really early. The couple of the community theater directors that I worked with in and around Chicago, I just had such a soft landing. I know the theater world, and on your story about being treated badly by people, I think that's probably in some ways more common for young people, and a lot of kids who come into showbiz are badly treated and they're sort of forced into it, and it's not a happy experience. But I was so fortunate to have such a soft landing with such supportive directors. Ray Bradford was one of them. He had a little theater in Lisle, Illinois called Once Upon a Stage, and I did like 3 or 4 shows with him in a very short amount of time. And then Ina, I believe her last name was pronounced Noai, but she did a production theater for the deaf. So I learned sign language for it, and there were deaf actors and hearing actors in the production. And so just these directors who were working in, with no money and these very small environments, but just bringing such joy and supportive atmosphere, that gave me such a great launching pad. And then they specifically encouraged my mom to think about taking me to Chicago for professional work. And that's something that she had never considered. We didn't go into it thinking career. So we were just fortunate that we had that kind of like lift and help and encouragement that led to everything else. I also remember there was an assistant director of Precious Sons who gave me a couple little things, like, these are things I like to tell young actors. And there's one that I will always remember, which is every entrance is an exit. So wherever you're coming from, if you make an entrance into a scene, you're coming from somewhere else. And, again, at 14 years old, just to sort of have that little, very simple tool, just to remember that there's, and something that Sandy, the teacher that I worked with for many years, the character, you meet the character on the page of the script, but that character is living 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So you can always be thinking about and mindful of the whole life. You're seeing a portrait, a piece of that life in the piece, but they're also.
I love that. Andrew, you were talking about Rob McClure earlier. Is that who you consider your mentor full time? Or
yeah, there are 2 mentors, and I think I mentioned them both that come to my head. Both named Rob or Robert. I guess to be a mentor to me, you have to be named Robert. So Robert Edwin, actually, my voice coach and a mentor to me. I met him right when I was going through my voice change, maybe after Christmas Carol when I was 13 or 14 years old. So I mean, just from like a practicality standpoint of navigating that voice change, he played a huge role in that. But he also taught me, the importance of understanding, understanding your voice and what is actually happening when you use it and when you sing. Not saying you need to be a music theory expert and everything. That's not what I'm talking about, but talking about specifically, the different types of singing, what is happening when you sing. He wasn't the type of teacher that just said, okay, let's go in, let's work on a song and figure out how you can improve it. He really forced me to take a step back and learn about true technique, and that was huge. And then, as I made the transition into the business side of things, he's continued to play a huge role in mentoring me, really providing valuable insight into how people learn as singers. And I, like I said, still go to my Thursday at 1 p.m. voice lessons over Zoom now. And we sort of learn together from just experiencing. We both learn new things. And then with Rob, met him at the Arden, became a mentor to me. Rob and I really clicked because I think that from a performance standpoint, we're a very similar type in the roles in which we play. So that really helped out. But he was the person who also really forced me and taught me to take a step back and what you can learn and figure out what you can learn by watching others. Just like Robert Edwin, there were full lessons, 2 hours long, where I wouldn't really perform or do work anything. I remember coming in and saying, okay, we're going to watch Hey Mr. Producer today and let's learn from it. And that's sort of the value that and the new way of thinking that he provided for me. And then from the business side of things, he really helped with that transition also over to the entrepreneur side of things, because he brought that industry knowledge into Harmony Helper. But also, as I've mentioned, every artist is an entrepreneur in their own way, and he's an entrepreneurial thinker, and sort of came on board with the Harmony Helper side of things. And we've been able to really bounce ideas off of each other, and they both continue to be mentors to me to this day.
Yeah, when you're talking about the entrepreneurship, in making my first feature film, I had an idea, and I had a certain amount of time and a certain amount of money, and I went to professionals, and they said, you don't have enough money and you don't have enough time. And so I tried to raise the $1 million, and nobody was giving me any money. And a friend of mine, an actor friend, Count Stovall, said, I don't have $1 million for you, but I have someone who can give you $1 million worth of advice. And his name is Junie Smith. I've met him once. I've probably spoken to him hundreds of times. He literally pep talked me through making a feature film. I didn't have the money, so I did all the jobs. Like when you see the credits, I did all the jobs. And it was literally, this person who even today, as we're trying to distribute it, like he just gets on the phone and it's like he is just constantly giving me a pep talk, and he's just telling me I can and telling me I can, and it's been invaluable. Like I could not have done it without him. But I mean, granted, he's done 31 films in 28 years. So he's a person who knows what he's talking about. So I could trust that whatever he was telling me, and if he told me I could do it, that I could do it. Yeah, so definitely the mentor in my life at the moment. And then from childhood, my elementary school teacher, Harris Goldenberg, is how I got to study professionally at the St. Nicholas Theater. I was the only kid there. John Mahoney was in his first acting class, like at 45, and I was 15, and he went and lobbied to Stephen and Bill that I should be studying professionally, that I was that good. And so that is how I ended up getting to study professionally, and really taught me about which schools to apply to and helped me figure that out. And also convinced me, Harris convinced me that I shouldn't go to Puerto Rico on my Christmas break at Carnegie Mellon, that I should come and go to this cattle call from the Sun Times in Chicago. I was like, I'm not going to get a Broadway show from a cattle call. I'm going to Puerto Rico. And he's like, no, you have to come here and you have to audition for this thing. And so I didn't go to Puerto Rico. I didn't even get to Puerto Rico till like 2 years ago because he was like, no, you've got to come and do this cattle call. And so I did. And then my third mentor would be George C. Wolfe, who, I probably wouldn't have a career if it weren't for George C. Wolfe. He wrote my first nightclub act when he was still an NYU student. He cast me in Jelly's Last Jam, Carolina Change, The Wild Party. And whenever I'm, in the midst of a show and I don't want to know what to do, I call him up and I'm like, here's what's going on. What do I do?
I think the common thread here is that all of us have had people believe in us. Like literally, it seems like the common thread is that even with training, as long as you have somebody saying you're worth investing in, that's what sends you off to go do that. What advice would all of you give young people or contemporaries about seeking education?
If possible, audit and or have people who are contemporaneously studying in that program that you can talk to and get their direct current experience, because there are programs that can have reputations that go back decades, but there's turnover in those programs, so you don't know what the quality of the staff is at this moment. So try to do campus visits, and if they're squirrely about you auditing classes, maybe that's a little bit of a sign, that's a little bit of a red flag. And I've had the honor of meeting students all over the country at different times. And there's times when I've been in a very small, unknown program and been really impressed by the quality of the training that they're getting there, that they're just building, So yeah, maybe they wouldn't have as much of a trampoline jump into being seen by agents and managers out of the program, maybe, but the quality of the work was really something special, as opposed to sometimes you go to these really famous programs and it can get a little factory feeling sometimes if they don't have the best people on staff at the time. So that would be, and watch, go to see things obviously when theater's back, but there's tons of film and television, there's so much content. See quality work and see what about that work speaks to your heart that you can lean into for yourself.
And I want to jump on that thing from Anthony. Like William Esper always said, you know, you may like a lot of work, but when you find actors whose the type of work they do is the type of work you want to do, find out who they studied with, because chances are that's how you're going to learn to do that kind of work. There are people who I love watching, but it isn't the kind of work I want to do. I love seeing what they do, but it's not what I'm going to do. And so, you know, I think that's a big thing. Find out about who studied with whose work you like. Also, what Anthony said about it being, you know, what's the contemporary reputation? Look, I studied with Stella Adler towards the end of her life, and she was crazy. She was not a good teacher. Okay. She was violent and crazy, and I quit. Okay. Because I was like, this woman's crazy. So, reputation, you know, you got to know what's happening right now. For me, Warren Robertson was like, you know, doing psychotherapy on people. And I was like, no, that's not kind of work I want to do. So, you know, just because someone has a reputation doesn't mean that they're good or that they're good for the kind of work that you want to do. So I think that, you know, I know it's hard for young people to go, well, how do I know what I want to do? I believe this in my heart and soul that it feels good when you're doing what you want to do. And when you're working with someone and that feel good thing is inspired and that fire is lit, that's where you're supposed to be. It doesn't have to be painful and hard. That doesn't mean that it isn't sometimes going to be hard, but when you get excited by the hard, or that the hard makes you go, oh my God, I'm doing something more, that's the kind of teachers you want to be with. And I don't know if schools do this. When I went to college, they used to cut people. I don't know if that happens anymore. But the best story I heard about that was from Billy Porter at Carnegie Mellon. And he said they're going to cut him at the end of his first year. And he said, well, I'm not going anywhere because I paid my money and I've been showing up at my class. And if there's no roles in the theater for people like me, that's what I'm paying you to train me for. And he did not leave. And so I just loved the idea of him like, I don't really care what you're saying. That's what I'm here for. Like really taking ownership and not letting some words that someone says define you. You know, just be like, okay, well, that's your opinion. You know, trust your own heart says, I'm supposed to be doing this.
For me, two quick things. The first thing is that there's always more to learn. There's never, you know, an end chapter to the learning experience. You may be all the way up here, but there's always something more that can push you just a little bit further. The other thing is something that I've been saying is understand and realize your own self-worth and what your training and your continued training has given you, and use it in ways you may not even expect them to come into play, whether it be entrepreneurship, whether it be performing, or whether it be something else. Find that fire that Tonya mentioned and follow it, and use all the tools that you have and apply them in ways that you never thought would be possible.
And I want to jump on one more thing. You know, Andrew's an entrepreneur. I think all artists have to be entrepreneurs right now. I think all of us on here have all made our own work, produced it, directed, written it. I think that that's essential. I think that there's a way in which artists are talked about and denigrated and devalued. And the fact is, there is no work for anybody without us. Okay, people are not coming to see somebody read a play. They're not coming to see a set design. They're coming to see actors. And for us to remember that, and that when we are generating work of our own, it takes away that feeling of waiting to be picked. and then feeling bad because you weren't picked. You can also then generate the work that is specific to what only you know you can do. Hannah Gadsby is like one of my favorites. She is my muse. She has created something that is so unique to who she is. No one else could do that thing she does. And it inspires me to find, like, what is this thing that only I can do? So I feel like all artists need to work on that.
Yes, I fully agree. I think that's a perfect note to end on, because we are all small businesses, truly, all the time. Whenever I see Shop Small, I think even us actors, like, we're all producing our own work and doing all that great stuff. Finally, please tell us quickly about any of the projects that you all have coming up that you'd like for people to subscribe to and watch and view and ingest, and of course, all of your social handles as well.
I'm at Albino Kid on Twitter, at Albino Kid 1026 on Instagram, and Star Trek Discovery season 4. I think apparently it's coming out later this year. The other seasons are available on Paramount Plus in the U.S. and on Netflix internationally, and you know, hopefully be on stage doing concerts and stuff whenever that's possible again. I hope so.
And I would just ask everybody to subscribe to redpillmovie2020.com so you can see this feature film that's about this moment we're living in. We'll be at the Michaud Film Festival live, the first theater in Los Angeles we're going to screen live, April 26th to May 2nd. It's called Red Pill. That's what I'm doing right now, all Red Pill all the time. That's our poster right behind me.
And then for me, I'm just constantly working on Harmony Helper and finding new ways and building new tools to help singers and performers. You can learn more at harmonyhelper.com or follow us on all the different platforms at Harmony Helper. And if anyone has any questions, they'll talk to me and Harmony Helper, and we're happy to help.
Thank you so much. Yes, that app is incredible. I sound not as bad as I used to. I have been Tell Me on a Sunday podcast and Broadway Radio's Grace Aki. Thank you, Tonya, Anthony, and Andrew for joining us today. Have a good day.
For having us, Grace.